Good evening, everyone. It's good to see you all. If you had vacation plans to Ukraine, I'm guessing you canceled them for the night. Getting in is going to be difficult. Getting out also is going to be difficult, right? So, we'll keep praying for our pastor, and hopefully he will find his way to the border and cross it very soon. So tonight we want to look at, it's basically a follow-up. Last week on Thursday night, our focus was also on evidence for Joshua's conquest, but we focused on a very recently excavated and published inscription, the Lachish Milk Bowl Ostrachan, and I hope you enjoyed that. I really enjoyed walking through that with you. It's a really powerful piece of evidence. There's nothing more powerful in archaeology than an inscription, because now you're getting firsthand information directly from the people of the time in their own words, not just some kind of other piece of evidence that you have to interpret or guess or conjecture something, but it's a lot more cut and dry. But with Jericho, we do have a lot of circumstantial archaeological evidence. So that's what we want to focus on tonight, the evidence for that. First, we'll look at the text. I have my translation up here for you, so we'll kind of walk through that and then take a look at some of the evidence that's there. So why don't I start us with a word of prayer, and then off we go. Father, we thank you so much for the opportunity we have tonight to look into the exciting things that happened way back when, in 1406 BC, when you led the people of Israel under Joshua to conquer the land of Canaan, which is the land that you promised. And last week we looked at it and saw that this is indeed the land flowing with milk and honey, and we saw it in the form of a milk bowl that had an inscription signed by the man who was in charge of honey. So it's a thrill that we have to open up the things of the past through your word and through that which has been excavated. Bless our time. May our excitement about all that you've done grow as a result, and may our trust in you be even deeper as we are impressed by you, impressed by the Spirit of God, who reveals all truth to us. So answer these prayers and go above and beyond for the sake of Jesus Christ, in whose name we pray. Amen. All right, so Jericho. Now, I'm not going to walk through the entire passage. There's just too much there, and it will take away too much of our time from that which we need to do to show you the physical evidence of this destruction. But we want to give you both enough to kind of give you the simple picture and to focus on those elements that we can kind of evaluate archaeologically, right? So those are the 2 points of focus that I had in preparing the text. So here we are in Joshua 6, chapter 6, starting with verse 1. And again, this is my translation. It's fresh. I couldn't find my old translation of the book of Joshua, so I translated it afresh. Well, here we go. Now, Jericho was sealed. And you see everywhere I have highlighting, that's something that we can look at archaeologically, right? Now, Jericho was sealed, and it was closed off from in front of the sons of Israel. So, when it says it was sealed, what does that mean? What's the implication? Yeah, the gates are closed. And what else does it imply? They're not just gates there are or is. They're guards, yeah. But what are the gates attached to? Wall. So there is a city wall around the circumference of the city, true? And any gates that were there were closed and sealed, closed and locked. No one was exiting, and no one was entering. There you go. You can't get in, you can't get out. It's a little bit like Ukraine at the moment. Verse 2, then he who is said to Joshua, look, I have given Jericho, its king, and its powerful army into your hand. So before the battle even takes place, before there's conflict, before there's, mortal combat going on between people, hand-to-hand combat, before any of that takes place, God confidently states that I have given Jericho into your hand. What a powerful statement. It's all over. It's a done deal. Before the fighting starts, it's already over. And you have gained Jericho. Verse 3, you must surround the city with all of the men of war encircling the city once. Now, what's interesting about this is in Hebrew, the term, it can mean different things, but literally at its root, it means to surround or to be around, right? So technically, all it's demanding from the readers is that they understand that people encircled the city. Now, surrounding it could be restricted to everyone who is there forming a circle, however close they are to one another, whether it's shoulder to shoulder or 10 feet apart or whatever the distance is. But basically, it's a circle around the entire city. Most of our translations use the word march, marched around the city. That's not in the text. It's not in the text. So, but with the use of this word, this verb, it's savav, the Hebrew verb savav, with that verb, it's possible that it could be implying a movement around something. That's possible. So, one of our favorite Sunday school stories is that the people walked all the way around the circumference of the city. And again, that may have happened, but it may not have, because definitely the verb itself doesn't express that. And the most common word that would be used for this, if there were a movement around it, would be the Hebrew verb halak, which is the verb for walk or go, but mainly walk. So it would be a lot clearer to us, and we would know if there were a marching, if it did use that verb, but it doesn't. So we move on. You must perform this activity, and those are my two words for context, this activity. You must perform this activity for 6 days. So 6 different days, you need to surround the city, either just forming a circle all around it or marching around it, one or the other. Verse 4, plus 7 priests must carry 7 ram's horns in front of the ark. Does anyone know, I'm sure some of you have been to Israel, if not a lot of you, does anyone know what is the Hebrew word for a ram's horn? Shofar. Shofar is the word, and that's exactly what appears in Hebrew. So it's basically, the concept is that it's a ram's horn that has been, whittled or prepared to be able to be used to blow into it to make a sound. A lot of translations use the word trumpet here. It's a horn. It's still a horn. It's not a trumpet in the sense of a brass trumpet that we're used to. So if you're going to embrace the translation of trumpet, just make sure you understand it's not that kind of trumpet. John Philip Sousa style. It's different. It's just the ram's horn that's prepared to be able to be blown. Then on the 7th day, you must surround the city 7 times, and the priest must blow the ram's horns. So again, on the 7th day, it's one of two things going on. Either, let's say it's 10 a.m. or 9 a.m. 9 a.m., everybody encircles the city. They stand there a while, they leave. 9:30 or 10, they surround it again, and then disperse, and do this 7 times. That's possible. The other possibility is that they move around the city 7 times. But the really interesting thing here is the Sabbath. How many days in a row was an ancient Jew allowed to work? 6. The seventh day, they don't work, do they? What's interesting here, and of course, they already have the law of Moses at this time, don't they? True? So they know you work 6 days and the seventh you rest. So isn't it interesting that they do this activity, they participate in this activity for 7 straight days, not 6. Isn't that fascinating? Did you ever think about that? Now, you be the judge whether or not that's breaking the Sabbath. But the bottom line is, God instructed them, didn't he? So whether it's Sabbath breaking or not, who cares? God assigned it. You do it. You follow it. That's all that's important, right? And was man made for the Sabbath, or was the Sabbath made for man? Anyway, right? So, not a problem. All right, verse 5. So it will be during the blowing of the ram's horn, the shofar, during your hearing of the sound of the horn, that all of the people must shout a great shout, and the city wall will fall down below itself. Literally, it says that. The city wall will fall down below itself. So I think the idea is, picture yourself kind of hovering over the very top, like your toes are touching the top of the city wall, and all of a sudden it falls down on itself, and you see it tumbling down to the ground. And you're still hovering, you have one of those suits on that they have nowadays where you can fly, right? And you're in neutral, but you're not going up or down. And there it goes. It falls down on itself. So pieces break and fall and hit the ground, and then more fall and hit on top of those, and more fall and hit on top of those too. So it's falling on itself. That's the idea of what's happening. So the shout comes, or is to come, when the sound of the horn is heard. That's when the great shout comes. And the city wall will fall down. So city wall, I've highlighted that, and that's because there's our description that we need archaeologically. There needs to be a city wall around the city of Jericho if we've got the right place and the right time for the destruction under Joshua. And, I didn't even put it in highlights, but there should be evidence, shouldn't there, of the wall falling down on itself. Now, maybe some, who knows, there's some incredible ancient cleaning service that comes up to the site and moves it all away. Maybe that could happen, but come on. Seriously? Probably not. So there should be signs of that as well. And the people will ascend, go up into the city, with each man going forward. And of course, he uses the verb ascend because the position of the people standing, looking at the city of Jericho, the Israelites, they would have been lower because, as every ancient city, virtually, it's built on a height, right? So the city dwellers are physically, elevation-wise, a lot higher than the Israelites. So they have to ascend. They have to climb up to get into the city. No doubt about it. Verse 20. So we're skipping ahead. We're going over, we're passing over a number of verses of activities that go on. And again, they're not crucial to our archaeological understanding or affirmation of the conquest of Jericho. So that's why I skipped them. And then we go right to 20, where it picks up on the fleshing out of the instruction from God. So it says this: Then the people shouted, and the priests blew the horns. So it happened, as the people heard the sound of the horn, that the people loudly shouted a great shout. And the wall fell down below itself. Then the people ascended into the city, just like God had instructed, right? They go up, they climb up the debris, if you will, of the broken parts of the wall, and go up into the city. Which, of course, begs the question, did the entire wall, every inch of it, did the entire wall fall down? Answer, We don't know. We don't know. The Bible doesn't say. But the bottom line is it doesn't need to. It doesn't have to. Only enough parts of it need to fall down for the Israelites to successfully penetrate into the city. That's all. So, then the people ascended with each man going forward. Thus they utterly slaughtered, don't you like that description? They utterly slaughtered all that were in the city. And that is composed of whom? And so there's a little parenthetical to add what that consists of. The ones who were slaughtered. From man to woman, from young to old, both cattle, sheep, and donkey. So there's 7 for you right there. Those are the ones that were slaughtered. And it's basically every life form that is somehow connected to the inhabitants of Jericho. Verse 22, Now Joshua said to the 2 men who spied out the land. Remember, because earlier, and we didn't read this, but earlier in chapter 2, he sends these 2 spies, and they kind of check things out. It's a lay of the land thing with the city of Jericho. They kind of want to take some notes and, be able to describe to Joshua and the leaders what the city looks like from the inside, and therefore they could form a strategy for once they get into the city, how they would go through with the executions and the conquest of the city. So the 2 men who spied out the land go into the house of the female prostitute and bring her out from there, along with all who belong to her, according to which you swore to her. So the 2 young male spies went and brought out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, and all who belonged to her. And now we want to kind of pop down to the bottom where that asterisk is and just get a little glimpse of what that was like so it's a little clearer in our minds. So it said this in 2:15, again, several chapters earlier, 4 chapters earlier. Then she, and of course that's Rahab, lowered them, and of course that's the spies, by a rope through the window because her house was against the city wall. And there you have it in highlights, right? Her house was against the city wall. If we've got the right site and the right time and the right wall even, then it should be the case that at least somewhere on that wall there would be a connection between a house and the wall. That shouldn't be, absent altogether. So is there any archaeological evidence of a house and a wall together? Let's hold that thought. In that she, Rahab, was living along the wall. She was living along the wall, which doesn't mean that she's, a homeless person laying next to the wall. Go back to what it said before. Her house was against the wall. So her house abutted the wall. So if she fell asleep, in the part of her house that room where it's right by the wall, then she would be right there by the city wall. The city wall is either a common wall or it's contiguous, meaning the wall of her house was built next to the wall of the city. So the city wall would have been built first, and then if there was a wall on that side of where the city wall is, then that wall would have been built to abut the city wall. So it would be right on top of it, right against it, if you will. So, verse 17, we skip verse 16. Then the men, that is the spies, said to her, "We will be free from this oath that you made us swear, unless when we come into the land, you tie this scarlet cord." So they handed her a scarlet cord in the window through which you lowered us. So there needs to be not only a city wall and not only a house that abuts the city wall, but there needs to be a window that goes through if there is, that house's wall, all right? So there's a cut through that wall, and then through all the way through the city wall, and then down. There has to be that for it to be the right place at the right time. So, archaeologically, do we have anything that suggests that could be true? And gather to yourself into the house your father, mother, brothers, and your father's entire house. So, now back to the present, if you will, where we are in chapter 6 in the story. You know, the city already has been overcome and attacked and overcome. Israelites have won the battle, and now they're going after Rahab. So we pick it up where the asterisk is. Right here, they also brought out all of her relatives, and they put them outside the camp of Israel. Then they burned the city with fire. So obviously, you want to make sure Rahab and her family are out first, and then you can light the fuse and put the city on fire. So that's what they did. They made sure she was out and safe. So they burned the city with fire. And there I have that highlighted as well, don't I? And that's something, as an archaeologist, you're always looking for. The two most exciting things for an archaeologist to find, to come across at a dig, one is tombs, cemeteries, because you can get so much information from them. It sounds kind of morbid and gross, doesn't it? But that's important. Second, anything destroyed by fire, because much more can and will be preserved through fire than destroyed through fire, at least as observable archaeologically. Isn't that amazing? All right, so there we have it. There's the text. Now we have a background for the events of the story of the destruction of the city of Jericho. And of course, this is the first city of the conquest that was destroyed. And as such, it was a special city. How was it special? Anybody know how Jericho was special? How was it treated specially? I guess we didn't talk about this, did we?
Big walls.
Big walls. But in relation to God, how did they need to treat the city as the first city that was destroyed? Yeah, they were prohibited from taking things for themselves from Jericho, right? Remember, the Israelites, every time you turn around, they're getting the spoils. It's time to leave Egypt. What do? We get all their silver and gold, and off we go, all right? But with this city, because it's the first city to be conquered, it's treated as if it's the first fruits that you don't eat for yourself or you don't take for yourself. You offer it to God as a sacrifice. So that's the idea with the city. The city is offered to God. It belongs to Him, right? The conquest is His, and because we're leaving it sacred to God, we're not going to take anything for ourselves. That's the idea. I mean, minus Achan, right? Mm-hmm.
I'm impressed that they called God He who is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I had not heard.
Yeah. And
expressed that way.
And in my translation, and I tell my Hebrew students this all the time, whenever you can translate. Don't transliterate. Translate. Because the whole purpose is to get it into another language so that the people in that other language can understand. The word Lord is not, it may be in your English Bible, but if that's there, that's not the word that's here. It's not the word Lord. Lord is Adonai. This is Yahweh. Yahweh is the covenant name of God. And the covenant name of God means He who is, or the one who goes on existing. It's talking about His timelessness. That's the root of His name. The meaning reflects His timelessness. He who goes on existing, without end, without start. He just goes on existing. And isn't that the perfect descriptor for God? It's a description that points to an unconfined characteristic, right? The best qualities of the character of God are all what's the word? Communicable. Whew. It's hard to pronounce that because you hardly ever say it. Non-communicable. What does that mean? Attributes that God can't give over to mankind. God's eternality. Now, we can talk about from the moment we're born until the end of time, infinite future. We can talk about that, but that's not eternal. That's everlasting. God alone, he's the only being who is eternal because he has no beginning. Bends the mind to try to understand that, but that's an incommunicable attribute of God. Another incommunicable attribute of God is his omnipresence. We can be at one place at one time. Isn't that terrible? If I could only have, what do you call that? Clone. If I only could have a clone who could work and do all the things that I would do, right? Maybe 5 clones. But we don't have that. We can only be in one place. Even Satan himself can only be at one place at one time. Isn't that comforting? He can't be everywhere all the time. He can't because he's not like God. Only God is everywhere. So these are the kinds of characteristics of God that are incommunicable, that he can't give over to mankind. He alone bears this. So it's fascinating how the covenant name he chooses to give his people, by which they will know him throughout their history, reflects this one really important, incommunicable attribute of God, that he goes on existing timelessly. It's awesome. Awesome, awesome. All right, so now let's move on into the archaeology, and we'll start by orienting you to the site of Jericho, which in Arabic is known as Tel Es-Sultan, right? So if you go over there and you're speaking to an Arab speaker, you say, Tel Es-Sultan, and then he'll take you to the site of Jericho, no matter whether he speaks English or not. So this is an Israeli map, and Israeli maps are always, always, always east-oriented, not north-oriented, which means for us, we're used to north is up, right, in a map. For the Israelis, north isn't up because that's not the most important point on the compass. East is. Why is east most important for the Israelis? The sun, but even more importantly than the sun, civilization. Their forefather Abraham, their beginnings come from the east. So that's, for them, the point of orientation. So east is up, north is to your left, south is to your right, west is below, at the bottom. So this is the Transjordanian Plateau over here. And this area all in here is the Jordan Rift Valley, which features the Jordan River that flows. It's very lightly colored here in almost an off gray. And it flows and dumps into the Dead Sea. And of course, here's the Dead Sea. And at the time the map was made, all of the southern part of the Dead Sea is already exposed because the Dead Sea is shrinking and continues to shrink, sadly to say. But then as you go west, so you climb down the Transjordanian Plateau into the Jordan Rift Valley, which, by the way, the Jordan Rift Valley is part of the Afro-Arabian fault line. Have you ever heard of that before? The Afro-Arabian fault line? And it extends all the way from Mozambique, the poorest nation in the world. At last I saw the measurements. It extends north through the rest of the eastern part of Africa. It goes through the Sinai area, and it hugs the Cisjordan, or the land of Israel, Canaan, etc., and continues to the north. It goes straight through Syria, all the way up to the Amanus Mountains in Turkey. Isn't that amazing? And it's one of the most intense fault lines on planet Earth. So when you read about earthquakes that happen in ancient or modern times in Israel, don't be shocked, because it is sitting on the edge of a major fault line. And that's why it's so low. That's why it's the lowest point on earth that you can go, right along the Dead Sea. It's the lowest place you can go on earth without having scuba gear on. That's it. You can't go any lower. And that's why it's always, virtually always, so hot, because it's so low in elevation, below sea level. I think the number right here is written 1,181 feet. And there's a negative in front of it, which means below sea level. So it's extremely low. But here's Jericho, not too high, much higher than that, positioned in the Jordan Rift Valley. And you can see that it's on the western side of the Jordan Rift Valley as opposed to the eastern side of the Jordan Rift Valley. So the Israelites, when they crossed the majority of the Jordan Rift and eventually got to Jericho here, which is kind of like on the outskirts of the hills that you'd climb to get up into the central mountain spine, onto the central mountain spine, which is this area in here, the high country, the high ground. And then here's Jerusalem for perspective. Okay, so that's where we're looking at. This image will show you, so all of this dotted grayed in area, that's all part of New Testament Jericho. So you can see it's kind of spread out in several different sectors. And that's kind of as far as we know, or as far as we knew at the time of the archaeology that showed this to us. Maybe it's bigger than that, but it's at least this big in the ancient world. Then, you want to talk about obscure? Look at this. You see that little oval right there? That is the Old Testament. I mean, that is the Jericho of the Old Testament era of Joshua's day. Isn't that fascinating? It's just a tiny little blip on the radar screen. Really small. It's like, 2 to 4 acres or something like that? It's just tiny. So, now some images to kind of let us see from above. So this is the desert hills, if you will, that are on the east, to the east of the Mount of Olives and Jerusalem. All of that is to the east of it as you go down into the Jordan Rift Valley. And all of this area here, you see some green, that's all part of that Jordan Rift Valley, very low down in elevation, until Jericho is right here, not all that far from the base of the hills. Wadi Kilt, which is a seasonal river, which when rain comes, which is rare, it dumps water down here into the valley. And then at the top, you may be able to see a little bit of white here, maybe not from the view. It's kind of hard, but there's a little bit of white here. That's the snow of Mount Hermon, which is on the other side of the Jordan Rift Valley and far to the north. It's visible, though, from here. And then Tel Jericho is just on the edge here off the map, off the view, off the screen. And then the Judean wilderness is all in here. Jericho over here. The Jordan River coming down. So this is a southward flow of the river flowing down toward the Dead Sea. And there's a little bit of a visibility of some civilization here. That's the city of Amman, Jordan, in modern times. So again, here's the Jordan River as it flows to the south, to the right. And Wadi Kilt dumps into the Jordan Rift right here. And then Tel Jericho is located right there. Here it is again, Tel Jericho. Now you can see a little bit of the Dead Sea. And it looks kind of murky, doesn't it? It's a murky, misty environment most of the time because of the heat, because of the water, because of the chemicals, all of those things. And the fact that, nothing can go anywhere. This is the dumping ground for everything. It all flows down into the Dead Sea from all directions around it, except to the south. So again, Wadi Kilt dumping in, and then now we're starting to see Old Testament Jericho a little bit bigger here, and you can see that it's that mound shape, that ovular shape. And there it is. Now you can get a little glimpse. We were looking at a bunch of bird's eye views. This is closer to a worm's eye view, so you can see a little bit of the raised level of Jericho. And palm trees are there, of course. And here it is now in its full glory. That's Old Testament Jericho. Very modest in size. All right, a background for the site. Jericho is situated in the southern part of the Jordan Rift Valley, about 10 miles northwest of the mouth of the Dead Sea. So if you have your hiking boots on and you're in good shape, you can hike from Jericho to the Dead Sea. But of course, it's going to be hot once you get there, if it's not hot enough in Jericho. And dominating one of the few routes leading directly from east to west. Josephus gives an accurate description of the region around Jericho, including the distances from Jericho to the Jordan River and Jerusalem. The city was established at one of the largest freshwater springs in all of the southern Levant, a spring known as Ain es-Sultan. So, in the ancient world, the most important thing is not gold, it's what? Water. No water, no survival. You have to have fresh water. And of course, the Dead Sea isn't the place to go, is it? And it was close to the east-west highway that connected Transjordan. Remember, that's across the Jordan Rift, the Transjordanian Plateau where Amman is. That's Transjordan. So it connected Transjordan to the hill country of Cisjordan. Cisjordan is another term for Canaan or the land of Israel. From its earliest occupation, Jericho enjoyed prominence and great importance among the cities of Canaan. Charles Warren, an early explorer, if you will, took initial soundings at the tell in 1868, sinking a number of shafts into the mound, and, of course, brilliant deduction here, and concluding that there was nothing to be found. So, the lesson from this is, if at first you don't succeed, try again. Don't give up. He probably gave up too early. The first large-scale excavations were those of an Austro-German expedition from 1907 to 1909, and then also in 1911. And that's a really important expedition because we're going to see something that contributes to our understanding of Jericho, especially as it relates to those requirements that have to be true of the Jericho of the conquest under Joshua. So this was under Ernst Zellin and Karl Watzinger. John Garstang of Great Britain excavated from 1930 to 36. And he found a residential area which he called City 4. And, just allowing you to read ahead into the book here, City 4 is the city of Joshua's day. That's the time period. That's the stratum, the level, the occupational phase that connects with the destruction under Joshua. So he found this residential area and called it City 4, and it was destroyed by fire, and he dated it to approximately 1400 BC. Now, in his day, in 1936 or before, does he have radiocarbon evidence at his disposal? Nope. So what do you think he uses to date this destruction? Biblical chronology. That's it. That's all he uses. Biblical chronology. Now, he's right. It's 1406. That's the right year. So, we know that from our even better understanding now of biblical chronology than was true in his day. Fellow Brit Kathleen Kenyon, and he was a believer. She was not. She was kind of the antithesis of a believer, if you will. She excavated from 1952 to 58, correctly redating the middle building of Garstang to the end of Middle Bronze Age II, approximately the date of 1560 BC. So there's this building called the Middle Building, and Garstang suggested that it dates to the Middle Bronze II, and I have a handout that you should have received. And on that handout you can see the time periods for Levantine archaeological stratification. And so the Middle Bronze Age II, you can see that begins in 1900 BC And the last phase of it, there are 3 phases of it. The last phase, C, 2C, ends in 1560. So she redated the middle building of Garstang, but she incorrectly redated the destruction of City 4 to the end of Middle Bronze Age 2 rather than the end of the Late Bronze Age 1. So she knows that if she calls this a destruction at the end of Late Bronze Age 1, that she's going to affirm the connection it has with biblical chronology. So she dates it earlier to the Middle Bronze Age, which I and many others, especially Bryant Wood, consider it to be a mistake. All right, this is a drawing of the site. So remember that we have that oval or that ovular shape of the city. There it is. And we have different colors for different excavations. So the blue areas, all these blue areas, that's where the Germano-Austrian team excavated. Okay? And the red areas, that's where Garstang, the Christian British man, excavated in the 30s, and then Kenyon in the 50s excavated these yellow areas. So you can see from this that the majority of the excavation, actually, it's kind of split, but probably the majority is the Germano-Austrian team. They did the most, and then Garstang second most, and then Kenyon third most. The reason for that, almost certainly, is the speed of the excavating. As we get closer to the present day, the activity of archaeological excavation, it improves. The methodology improves, and the need to be more careful improves. The need to dig down slower and evenly, comes into vogue. And so we do a much better job of excavating nowadays than they used to do back then. Back then, all you need to do is, take a backhoe out there and just get the dirt out of there and sift the dirt and throw the dirt away and, get another batch of dirt and bring it up and go through it quickly. So it's a different world in archaeology today. Jericho through the early Bronze Age, and I'll tell you what, for time, we're just going to skip this. So it's inhabited in the Neolithic period. It's inhabited, and there's a tower here, the Neolithic tower, that attests to this. It's there, and then here's another image of it. If you go to the site today, you have to stand much higher than where it's positioned. You look way down into the ground, and there it is, way down there. And the first thing you think to yourself is, wow, I can't believe there's such a difference in elevation. And it shows you the difference in the height of the city back in that day versus the height of, elevation of Jericho today. It's very different. And again, this is the place where everything dumps into. So in the Jordan Rift Valley, the sediment levels are always increasing. That's just how it goes. So there's the Neolithic Tower. We move on into the Middle Bronze Age. That's from 2000 to 1560 BC. Well, in about 1900, we get a reoccupation of the city. Semi-nomads move in tents, and the first houses of the Middle Bronze Age were quite different than the early Bronze Age. They have distinctive green bricks, irregular plans, and slighter buildings. But there was no urban center at this time. Burials were performed in separate tombs. All signs point to this being part of the great expansion of the Amorites. So probably Jericho of the Middle Bronze and Late Bronze Age is an Amorite site, who formed an important population in both Cisjordan and Transjordan and became a formidable foe for the Israelites. Town walls were erected in a fashion similar to those of early Bronze Age 4. The final stage of the Middle Bronze Age featured more of a town plan. So as you go along through the Middle Bronze Age, it gets bigger and better. That's the idea. It expands. It becomes more technological for its day, and they have greater features, more monumental architecture. And the city of this day featured a town plan including a massive revetment wall, and we'll see that in a moment, that served as a first line of defense at the base of a mud brick wall that rose above. So there is a tilted revetment wall. That's the idea. And then at the top of the revetment wall, so the enemies are coming, the ground is here. The enemies come after them here, and they come to this revetment wall, and it's really hard to climb the revetment wall. And in the ancient world, at this time, probably it was plastered to make it smoother and more difficult to ascend with ease. So you have that tilted revetment wall, and at the top of the revetment wall was a straight up and down mud brick, red mud brick wall. So that's essentially two lines of defense with one wall. The revetment, that's made of stone, and then the mud brick. And that's just what you'd think. It's mud brick. You take, it's witch's brew, right? You take a little bit of clay or soil, and you take some straw, and you take some water, and you stir it around, and then you lay it out in the sun, right? You maybe flatten it. You lay it out in the sun, and some number of hours later, what do you get? A mud brick. You can always fire those if you want, but especially if they're clay. But they didn't need to be fired. They could be strong and consistent on their own. So you just line up a bunch of bricks, and you make a wall out of red, in this case, red mud brick. All right, so where is the revetment wall? It's right here. It's the outer wall around toward the end of the Middle Bronze Age. It's late in the Middle Bronze Age, and so that wall goes all the way around the city. And there is a glacis. Okay, so there's an inner wall, and that inner wall is here. This is from the days of the early Bronze Age. There's an inner wall. So that's the approximate line of it. And between the two walls, this territory, in City 4, it had some houses in there, probably the poor rent district. But it also, there were parts of it that would have had a glacis, which is definitely going to be, so it's slanted and it's going to be plastered, which again makes it a little more difficult to scale. So the excavations provided by the Italians at the turn of the century allowed us to see more views of different things, such as the revetment wall here, and guess what this is here? That's collapsed mud brick. Revetment wall, and here is, now you can see the coloration, right? The ruddy color of it. So there's revetment wall. And now we move into the Late Bronze Age 1. And this is the time period that we want to focus on, because 1406 is the conquest, right toward the end of the Late Bronze Age 1B. And if you have your chart, you can look at that. Late Bronze Age 1B, it's about halfway down the sheet, a little beyond halfway. Approximately 1480, 1484, somewhere in there, to 1400. That's Late Bronze 1B. So it's at the end of this time period that the conquest begins, from 1406 to 1400. So this is City 4. The houses of City 4 that were excavated in the 1930 to 36 and 52 to 58 expeditions were small dwellings. They're very modest houses. Not a lot of rooms, not a lot of space in the rooms. So they're not wealthy people. These are not aristocrats. These are people who just make a living and survive. With small and irregular rooms lining two roads that in parts had shallow cobbled steps going up to the slopes. Many of these houses contained a large number of jars filled with grain. So that's Kathleen Kenyon, the non-Christian, speaking. Many of these houses contained a large number of jars filled with grain. What does that tell you? Well, they would have stored it there, yes. Yeah, it was just after the harvest. And does this suggest to us that there was a long, protracted siege of the city? No, no. Because if it were, there would be no grain found in all these houses, would there? So there wasn't a long siege, which is what you should expect if you're going to capture a city that has a huge revetment wall and a mud brick wall at the top of it as its outer line of defense. But there was no siege, evidently, because of this find. Fascinating, right? And both Kenyon and Garstang before her had found jars filled with grain. The paths or roads of his area A and her area B. So he excavated area A, and her area was called area B. So these paths and roads revealed that this was an ordinary part of town. Storerooms and shops were on the ground level, while living rooms were on the second floor, which is quite understandable given the heat in the Jordan Rift. Garstang referred to the middle building that he found as a palace and dated it to the same era as the houses of City 4. Yet Kenyon rightly demonstrated that this building, the middle building, this one building, belonged to a later date. All right, so here is the revetment wall in Joshua's day, and the plastered rampart is here. Wherever there weren't houses, it would be plastered rampart. And then there's this inner city wall as well. So that's a second line of defense, if you will. Or, I suppose if you call the revetment wall and the mud brick wall 2 lines of defense, this would be the third, but technically it's the second line of defense, this inner wall. So there's area A that we talked about where Garstang worked that we'll be looking at, and then B, very close to it, adjacent, is 2 square sections of area B. So this is the plan that Garstang came up with once he finished the excavating in area A, and this is some of what Kenyon designated in her area B. And there it is, back from the 30s. This is part of Garstang's work, photograph, black and white photograph that was taken to show you some of the remnants of the walls of the houses in the homes in Jericho. And again, you can see that these houses are small, right? Small houses and small rooms. Here's a person for perspective standing right there. This is a closer view of some houses that opened onto a street and went down to the left. So very clearly these are mud brick walls right here that are part of this house. It's not stone. So this is kind of giving you a cross-section to see what all this looks like. So you're a person standing here. The retaining or revetment wall is here, made of stone. And then at the top of it, there is the lower city wall made of mud brick. So it goes straight up. It's vertical. And then you climb up this plastered embankment here, and you go up to this upper city wall here. So if you somehow find your way into here and you kill off the people who are in this area, then you have to get through another city wall to get to people who are above that. So 2 lines of defense. We want to focus for a moment on the northern part of the tell, and you can see that this is an area in blue, which means it was excavated by the Germano-Austrian team of the early 20th century under Zellen and Watzinger. All right, so now we were looking, what is that, north, south? We're looking west-oriented, now we're looking north-oriented, more or less. And here is the drawing that the Austro-German team made of the revetment wall, and they actually call it in German, and I've translated it for you here, Israelite revetment wall. That's what it means, Israelite revetment wall. And that could suggest to you, are they saying that the Israelites created the wall? No, they're not saying that. They just mean during the time period that the Israelites show up. That's the revetment wall, okay? So there it is. And then you can see all of the houses that they excavated, right? Just like Kenyon and Garstang, they excavated houses. Well, look what we have here. We have an extant portion of the wall. You see this? These are two rows of mud bricks that are part of the original wall. And so that's original, and this part is original. That's original wall. And then look at the houses. See that house? It abuts this mud brick wall. That's the outer mud brick wall. Isn't that amazing? Right there. There it is. That house abuts it. And the same is true of this room, this room, these rooms, this room. So the city wall is running here. And all of these houses are abutted up against the wall at the time of the destruction of City 4. This fulfills the requirement of the Bible for the Jericho destroyed under Joshua. The house of Rahab had to be against the city wall, and that's exactly what's here. Isn't that fascinating? Here is another view of the towering revetment wall of City 4. So a question, if an attack is launched against the city and the wall is knocked down, which way will the wall fall? Answer, it should fall, or at least most of it. If you're breaking through a wall, it would fall this way, wouldn't it? But the collapsed mud brick was all found this way, following gravity. And sure enough, that's where the Israelites would have gone through. So we should expect that there would be the remains of this mud brick wall that would be in this area that had fallen up against, onto the ground and up against this revetment wall. So, looking at Kathleen Kenyon's diagram, here's what she has. Revetment wall right there. That's the revetment wall. So uphill is this way, up into the city. And in this purple area, there it is, her term, fallen red bricks. So look at that. You have fallen red mud bricks from the mud brick wall above that fell right down on top of the revetment wall. That suggests some kind of destruction of the city wall that's not your average bear, not your average conquest through invasion and siege, but something different. The wall that was above fell forward and down. And that makes perfect sense. If God caused the walls somehow at that moment to fall downward, what did he use? We don't know. Was it miraculous? Maybe. Maybe he used an earthquake. Because remember, we are right here in the middle of the Jordan Rift Valley, aren't we? So God could have easily, at the moment that the shofar was blown and the people screamed, at that moment God could have said, okay, they did exactly what I said. So God presses his button, and what happens? Earthquake. And the earthquake causes the walls to fall down. Maybe not every portion of the wall, but enough of the wall, enough of both mud brick walls, that it would fall down against the revetment wall, and they could climb up against the fallen pieces and get into the city, the lower part of the city, and then the fallen mud brick from the upper wall, they would have climbed up over that and into the inner part of the city. So here's revetment wall, and look at this. There is collapsed red mud brick, all in spades, all over the place. Collapsed red mud brick from the wall above. So this is an artist's rendition, revetment wall, and here's the window, right? And there's the red cord, the scarlet cord, that would have been hung out by Rahab. So we can conceive of her house being, for example, right here on the inside of this red mud brick city wall, right on the inside in this area. And so she had the spies go through here and drop down to the bottom, and off they went. So at whatever points we have such a collapse like this, and the people could go right in, attack here, and then go through areas like here and go in and attack these houses. So there you have it. And we see some collapsed mud brick all in here. And then in this area we have burn material. This is charred remains that demonstrate it was destroyed by fire, which of course the Bible says that it's destroyed by fire. And then this is the burn line here in another photo. So that's material that suggests that City 4 was indeed destroyed by fire. In fact, on a greater scale, you have all of this area that Kenyon recorded as demonstrating remains of a massive conflagration, which means a destruction by fire. And then we have, finally, we have storage jars that are found with grain in them right in Kenyon's bulk. So Kenyon excavated right here, and there are storage jars, and there's grain right in them that you can see, theoretically today, at least when the camera shot was taken. There's a close-up of it, the storage jar with the grain, and even closer. And then look at this. Look at all these storage jars from Garstang's day. Jar after jar after jar, full of grain. There it is, the very grain from the destruction under Joshua. Right there. That's it. The charred remains of the grain. Full. The storage jar is full of this grain. And then the pottery also reflects the time period of the 15th century. So there you have it. Evidence of Joshua's destruction.
Well, now this is a summation I came up with. The blowing of the 7 horns, and they're marching around the city 7 times for 7 days, and they're shouting at the same. I thought it was the vibration of the sound. Of course, along with God's help, I guess. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, that was just something I came up with.
And people have tried to do studies on this to see if this was enough. If this would have created enough force to be able to break through the walls. I don't know if that was... Yeah, okay, I'll repeat the question. So, one theory for what accounts for the destruction of the wall, or the walls in this case, as they go down and allowing the Israelites to get in. One theory is that the people being positioned around the city and yelling out loudly, that the vibration of it, kind of like the old soprano, right, who sings and hits that high note and the crystal glass breaks, that idea that the wall would somehow, reverberate and break and fall. I don't have a lot of faith in that theory. I would have to be proven that could work. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but yeah, I don't think it's the best option. It's an option, but at the end of the day, we don't know. It's conjecture. So I'm even conjecturing. My favorite theory is, and it's not mine alone, but it's the God-timed earthquake theory. That's my favorite one. That seems to work the best. And it doesn't have to be a miraculous event. All it has to be is perfect timing and powerful enough. That's all it has to be, to break down enough of the wall so that they can come in. All right, let's pray, and then we will close. Oh, before we close, and I'll just mention to you, I did bring, if anyone didn't get and wants a copy of my new book, Origins of the Hebrews, I brought more copies. So these are $40. And I brought more DVDs if you're interested in the Is Genesis History, Bible and Stars. I'm featured in this film, Is Genesis History, and this is the one where my kind of bonus material is, and talking about several important things related to the early chapters of Genesis and the archaeology and history behind that. And then a DVD on the Hebrew as the world's oldest alphabet. My proposal, that's groundbreaking and earth-shattering, that Hebrew is the language behind the world's oldest alphabetic script. So if you want the 4-part lecture series that I did in Minneapolis on that topic, that's $10. And then, just yesterday, I went to downtown Houston and picked up at a shipping company about 100 copies of my book that were shipped to me in December from Jerusalem. They went through Tel Aviv and Newark and then into the United States from there. And finally, they just made it to me yesterday afternoon when I picked them up. This book's been out of print since right when COVID hit, March of 2020, February, March of 2020. That's when it went out of print, and it's finally back in print. So if anyone's interested in a copy of this, and this is more expensive, my publisher's website sells it for $84, and they're the ones who price it, by the way. I don't. I'm just the author. And I have to pay for it too. This one is $60 if anyone is interested in a copy of my first book. That's finally back in print, and I'm very excited about that. The World's Oldest Alphabet is the title. Subtitle is a little more difficult. Hebrew as the language of the proto-consonantal script. Meaning Hebrew is the language behind the world's oldest alphabetic script. That's the idea. So it's the world's oldest alphabet.
I've got a Jewish friend which I can't figure out how to convert, and I'm wondering if that book might be useful in that case. Do you think it would be?
It is a great option. I can't guarantee it would work. There's no guarantees. But I will say this. Lots of Israeli and Jewish people have bought my book. I now have a really good friend along the coast in Israel, above Tel Aviv, who is a fantastic guy. And he loves my work, loves it to death. And we've been on Zoom calls already, and I'm building a rapport with him. And he just recently got both of my books, and he's loving them. And they're really important to him. And he constantly thanks me for helping to bring to light the truthful stories that are part of their heritage, right? So there's one example where it's really already paying off. And that's the goal. With my two books, I want the church to benefit. I want unbelievers to benefit. But more than anybody, personally, I want the Jews to benefit. Because those are God's people. They need to know the stories of their forefathers that are written in the Bible are true. Especially the Exodus and the 430 years they spent in Egypt, which secular scholars are telling them never happened. So, there you have it. Let's pray, and then you can be on your way. Lord, thank you for the opportunity this evening you gave us to look into the book of Joshua, chapters 2 and 6, and the evidence that connects us physically, with physical evidence, to the written word that's in the Bible itself. And it's amazing how the things that we read about that are requirements, that we find them to be true of the actual excavations that took place. We see the kind of wall collapse that we'd expect. We see the walls of the buildings that are right up against the city wall, just like with Rahab the harlot. And we see evidence of these of the destruction at the time of the harvest, which is exactly the time period that the Bible would suggest. In the spring when the harvest takes place, and seeing the grain. It just is an incredible witness, a testimony that's been preserved for us to see. You allowed us to see it, to be able to become in greater awe of you. We are amazed at who you are, because you indeed alone are He who is, the one who goes on existing, the eternal one, the King of kings, the Lord of lords, the only one and true living God. We acknowledge who you are and the importance of learning more of you so that we can appreciate you even more. Bless us that we might be a blessing to others. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.